Video games are very much an international business these days. Every day, amazing new titles seem to be coming from all corners of the world, bringing with them ideas as unique and diverse as the countries their creators hail from. Unfortunately, this wasn't always the case. Once upon a time, the gaming landscape was divided into two sides, East and West. Gaming has always had strong roots in Japan, and with the difficulties of physical production and translation back in the day, many deserving games simply weren't able to make the jump from one side of the globe to the other. However, as these obstacles have become fewer and fewer with time, some of those games have been given a new lease of life, something that fans may have been waiting years or even decades for. Whether they're worth the wait or not is another matter, but more games available to more people can only ever be a good thing. I'm Ben from TripleJump, and here are 10 games that took way too long to reach the West. Number 10. The Great Ace Attorney Adventures. Legal proceedings in any country are not something that's ever going to happen quickly, as anyone who has ever had to endure jury duty will tell you. But even so, having to wait 6 years to see the outcome of a case is a bit ridiculous. The Ace Attorney series of courtroom-driven adventure games has been showered with praise from its inception, becoming one of Capcom's most popular franchises worldwide, which left many fans objecting when the prequel installment for the Nintendo 3DS, The Great Ace Attorney Adventures, was confirmed to remain available only in Japan upon its release in 2015. Given that the game's story focuses on a Japanese protagonist visiting Victorian London, the reasons given for not localizing it included the difficulty of translating the cultural meanings behind the game's writing, as well as possible legal issues regarding the use of famous detective Sherlock Holmes. Yes. Despite fans' pleas, both Great Ace Attorney Adventures and its sequel would remain Japan exclusive until 2021, when both games were released worldwide as part of a compilation for the Switch, PlayStation 4, and PC, roughly 6 years after the original release of the first game. It took its sweet time getting here, but fans outside of Japan can finally find out what it is that makes the Great Ace Attorney so great. Number 9. Sin and Punishment. The Nintendo 64 was home to some of the most brilliant games of all time. Super Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, Glover. These are but a few of the legendary titles that graced the system. One title that is often spoken of in the same breath, yet remained unknown to much of the world for the better part of a decade, however, was Sin and Punishment. Originally released in 2000, Sin and Punishment is a fast and frenetic on-rails shooter game, sort of like Star Fox, but without spaceships or talking animals, yet somehow managing to be just as fun. Even though the game was set to remain available only in Japan, its positive reception led to some international critics importing copies for themselves and adding their own rave reviews to the pile. Sin and Punishment was doomed to be remembered by most as a cult classic that collectors would have to cough up increasingly ridiculous sums of money for until 2007, when, with the advent of online gaming and downloadable software, Nintendo announced that they would be making the game available internationally for the first time ever as part of their Virtual Console service on the Wii. 7 years is a long time to wait, but it's well worth it for a game that's so sinfully good. Number 8. The Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky SC. Role-playing games seem to be the most frequent offenders when it comes to long localization periods, probably because of just how much text there is to be translated. Of course, it tends to go faster if you have more than 2 people working on it. The Legend of Heroes is a long-running series that has quite a solid fanbase in Japan, yet never really seemed to catch on in the West, so it was a gamble on the part of publisher Xseed Games to release the first Trails in the Sky title. It was a gamble that didn't pay off, sadly, as the game sold below expectations and the release of the sequel had to be shelved. Enter Carpe Folga, a 2-person studio that specializes in localizing niche Japanese titles and who volunteered their efforts to bring Trails in the Sky SC to the West. It proved to be a monumental task given the size of the game's script, and personal struggles led to the project experiencing several delays. Trails in the Sky SC finally got a release outside Japan, but not until 2015, with various setbacks ultimately delaying the game 9 years. Given the final script contains more words than the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy combined, it's honestly a miracle the game came out at all. Number 7. Devil Summoner Soul Hackers. The Shin Megami Tensei series is absolutely massive, spawning not just one but multiple sub-series so popular that their spin-offs have spin-offs. With such a sprawling history, it's not a surprise that some games may have slipped through the cracks, but those cracks turned out to be awfully deep. Soul Hackers is the second installment of the Devil Summoner sub-series and was originally released for the Sega Saturn in 1997. While it would be ported to the more popular PlayStation in 1999, neither the original version nor the port would be released outside of Japan, though not for lack of trying. According to internal sources, there was an attempt to localize the PlayStation version for Western audiences, but the release ultimately fell through due to issues regarding content that was prohibited by Sony of America, because I suppose summoning demons just isn't wholesome enough for some people. Boo! Fast forward 16 years to 2013, and Soul Hackers would be released for a third time in a shiny new updated version for the Nintendo 3DS. This time, a proper localized release would finally reach North American and European store shelves, because unlike Sony, Nintendo of America seemingly had no problem with demonic summoning. Good for you. Number 6. Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. The storyline of the Metal Gear series already has more twists and turns than a hedge maze, and the last thing it needs is alternate timelines and non-canonical entries to make it even more confusing, and yet that's exactly what it got in the year 1990. Following the success of the original Metal Gear, Konami put a sequel into production without the involvement of series creator Hideo Kojima. Upon learning of the project, Kojima was inspired to develop his own sequel, which ultimately led to the release of two very different games: Metal Gear 2 Snake's Revenge, exclusively in Europe and North America, and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, exclusively in Japan. Due to Kojima's involvement, Solid Snake would naturally be deemed the true canonical sequel, but wouldn't become available to fans in the West until 2006, when it was included as bonus content in the expanded edition of Metal Gear Solid 3. If 16 years feels like a long wait, however, Japanese fans had to wait twice as long to play Snake's Revenge, which was released worldwide for the very first time as part of Volume 1 of the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection in 2023, 23 years after its release in the West.
Kept you waiting, huh?
Number 5. Monster World 4. The most maddening scenario for a collector of any kind is when there's just one more piece that you need to complete the set, but you can't find it anywhere. It's enough to drive someone mad. Mad enough to do terrible things like pay too much for something from a shady online retailer I wouldn't know anything about. I've never done that. I don't have a collection. Shut up. Video games are no exception to this, as anyone who follows the Wonder Boy franchise would know. The series consists of 7 main games stretching back all the way to 1986, all of which would be released worldwide in one form or another, except for one. Monster World 4, which confusingly is actually Wonder Boy 6, was only released for the Mega Drive in Japan, with no mention of plans for a localized version. That may have been the end of things back then, but fortunately the modern age has brought with it a renewed interest in retro gaming and new ways of distributing games to fans. Thanks to the availability of platforms like the Wii's Virtual Console, Monster World 4 finally received an official overseas release in 2012, 18 years after its original debut. And thanks to the production of a remake, the game today is more available than ever, and this time it's actually called Wonder Boy. Took them long enough. Number 4. Rhapsody 2 Ballad of the Little Princess. When you hear something described as a musical video game, your mind probably fills with images of rapping dogs and coloured notes flashing across the screen. If you fire up one of the Rhapsody games with that expectation in mind, though, you're in for a bit of a shock. Rhapsody, a musical adventure, was a charming little RPG for the original PlayStation that was unique in its use of theatrical song and dance numbers as a storytelling device, essentially taking the form of a playable stage musical. It was popular enough to get a sequel in 1999, but not popular enough for that sequel to leave Japan, not even when it was ported to the PSP or the PS3 or even to mobile phones in later years. It seemed that Rhapsody would become yet another franchise doomed to remain unplayable in the West, but fortunately 2023 would have fans singing a different tune. Following their re-release of the original Rhapsody in 2022, publisher Nippon Ichi Software announced that both Rhapsody 2 Ballad of the Little Princess and its sequel Rhapsody 3 would be receiving an enhanced port for Switch, PS5 and PC that would see a worldwide release for the first time. It took 24 years, but the series finally got the encore performance it deserved. Number 3. Earthbound Beginnings. The Earthbound series, or Mother as it's known in Japan, has a reputation for not being the easiest to find in the West. For ages, the second installment, Earthbound, was the only title to be localized, and even then it wasn't available in Europe until years later, and Mother 3 is arguably one of the most well-known games to never be released outside Japan at all. But for all of these frustrations, there are some triumphs to celebrate as well. The first game in the Mother series, the one that started it all, was originally released for the Famicom in 1989 and was actually scheduled for release in North America in 1991. Somewhere along the line, however, the powers that be at Nintendo decided the game was not commercially viable in the Western market, and the project was thrown in the bin. Years later, a completed prototype of this localized version was unearthed and circulated online under the fan-created title of Earthbound Zero, and interest in the game began to surge. This would ultimately lead to an official worldwide release of the game, now titled Earthbound Beginnings, for the Wii U's Virtual Console in 2015. If it took the first game 26 years, then that means Mother 3 should be releasing by 2032, right? Yes? Please? Come on now. Number 2. Fire Emblem, Shadow Dragon, and the Blade of Light. The Super Smash Bros. Series is beloved for many reasons, but chief among those may be that it serves as a gateway for people to discover new games that they may have never heard of before, and no series has benefited more from this than Fire Emblem. While the roster may be packed to the gills with blue-haired swordsmen now, when Super Smash Bros. Melee launched with 2 Fire Emblem protagonists as playable characters, international fans were left scratching their heads as the series had never made its way to the West. Their popularity, however, led to future installments getting localized, but that still left a hefty backlog of untranslated games dating all the way back to the 90s. Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light was the first installment of the series released for the Famicom in 1990. A remake of the game for the DS would reach Western shores in 2009, but the original game remained absent until a special re-release was announced for the Nintendo Switch in 2020 to mark the franchise's 30th anniversary, meaning the original version of Shadow Dragon took a full 3 decades to leave Japan. Tragically, this version was made available for a limited time only, because apparently, while we can have nice things, we just can't have them for very long. Number 1. Final Fantasy III. Hey kids, it's time for a maths lesson with Final Fantasy! Do you know what number comes after 1? That's right, it's 4! And after 4, of course, comes 6. Being a fan of the Final Fantasy series outside Japan was tough back in the 80s and 90s. Following the release of the first game, Square Enix passed over the following 2 sequels and didn't localize another installment until Final Fantasy IV released as Final Fantasy II in the West, and followed suit by releasing Final Fantasy VI as Final Fantasy III. This resulted in a trilogy of missing games for the NES and Super NES, comprised of the 2nd, 3rd, and 5th Final Fantasies. 2 and 5 would eventually see a worldwide release via port, but Final Fantasy III remained as elusive as the Loch Ness Monster. When the game was remade for the DS in 2006, it was big news as it marked the first time this rare title would be officially playable outside of Japan, but the original Famicom version would continue to be unavailable until its release as part of the Pixel Remaster Collection, finally reaching Western shores 31 years after it was first released. At that point, by the North American naming conventions, it would have been Final Fantasy XVI.